Joe Biden is learning the same lesson as Donald Trump, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and George H.W. Bush. A crisis on the southern border can and will threaten your entire domestic agenda. I'm Leland Vittert. Good evening. President Biden ran on a platform of core competency on important issues, in contrast to chaos, and bringing together not only his party, but independents and moderate Republicans to solve our nation's problems. Keep that in mind while we explain to you the state of play tonight in D.C. and on the southern border. An unstopped stream of illegal migrants continues to come across the Rio Grande. An attempt by the Border Patrol today to stop the flow of migrants using mounted agents backfired into a PR crisis for the overworked and understaffed agency. As the White House press secretary called the footage you see right there horrific, although it's still unclear exactly what was happening. Thousands still live in squalor under a bridge in Del Rio, Texas, and the Department of Homeland Security secretary came to visit, saying people shouldn't bother to make the trip to the United States illegally.
If you come to the United States illegally, you will be returned. Your journey will not succeed, and you will be endangering your life and your family's lives. This administration is committed to developing safe, orderly, and humane pathways for migration, but this is not the way to do it.
It's true that some under the bridge were sent to their native country of Haiti over the weekend on repatriation flights, so that threat does have some teeth. But in a best-case scenario, those flights are sending back just hundreds a day, while 200,000 arrive every month. Of course, Republicans are using the crisis on the border to mercilessly attack the Biden administration. But now the administration is getting hit from the left for being too harsh. First, the DHS secretary on CNN, then the White House press secretary today.
We're welcoming Afghans, but we're sending Haitians back. Is there a contradiction there?
Not at all. Those two processes are quite different.
You're allowing Afghans to come in, Afghan supporters to come in, as well as Mexicans, and then Haitians are not allowed. Can you speak to that, the issue of equity and fairness?
Absolutely, April, and I appreciate your question. Let me just take these different pieces side by side, right? One, our immigration policy is not about one country or discriminating against one country over another. We want to end that and hopefully put an end to what we saw over the last 4 years.
We're going to talk to reporter Jorge Ventura live at the bridge in Del Rio, Texas in just a minute. He spent the day talking to those coming across the Rio Grande and the Border Patrol agents who are trying to stop them. Jorge, stand by for 1 minute. This, of course, isn't happening in a vacuum. While the White House is dealing with the crisis at the border, they are dealing with multiple setbacks to their domestic political agenda. An attempt to end-run amnesty for 8 million illegal immigrants ended in a major rebuke that further puts in peril their $3.5 trillion human infrastructure bill. And now there's a split in the Democratic Party over just about every aspect of the president's policy proposals. For that part of the story, we have Real Clear Politics White House reporter Philip Wegman on the administration's plans, Pablo Manriquez of the Latino Rebels with how progressives might get those 8 million people legal status after all. But as we said, we're going to start with Jorge on the border. Still light out there, Jorge. First things first, has the Border Patrol been able to stop people from coming across the border yet?
So as of right now, due to the Texas State Troopers parking their SUVs on the riverbanks and having actually presence down there at the Del Rio International Bridge, which you can see right over my shoulder, it actually has stopped the Haitians from crossing. We're also getting reports that some of these Haitians are actually taking buses out of Mexico due to these deportations now and the fear of being deported back to Haiti. So as of right now, we have an upward of 10,000 migrants still living under that bridge. Most of the family units will be processed and will be released into the United States with a notice to appear. But the single males right now we are seeing are being deported back to Haiti. And those flights started on Sunday. There's about 8 flights per day that are deporting these single males from Del Rio, Texas.
So if you're a single male, you go back to Haiti. But if you're part of a family, then head out into America.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing right now. So most of these family units, what they're going to do is they're going to be processed, and after that, they'll be released into the United States with a notice to appear in court. The big problem with this is that notice to appear in court could actually not happen until up to 3 years, which, according to Border Patrol sources, most of the time, these migrants don't show up for that court order. So that's a big problem, and these conditions are horrible under there. COVID is not the only thing that they're scared of that might be spreading. There's other diseases as well. Just a few days ago, one of the Haitian women actually gave birth under the bridge, and she actually tested positive for COVID. So the situation is still a crisis under there, and the humanitarian conditions are horrible at this moment.
Yeah, and certainly the idea that after being there, if you come as a family, that three years you can live in the United States, and then who knows what happens. Have you been able to talk to anybody in terms of how big of an incentive that idea of a notice to appear and a ticket anywhere in the U.S. is?
Well, the Haitians that we've been speaking to have been living 3 to 4 years in South America and countries like Peru and Chile. And for them, they are going to hopefully, they said that they hope to get some type of temporary protected status here in the United States. But as of right now, there is really no incentive to show up for that court order. And these family units know that they're going to be processed, they're going to be released into the United States. Now, the reason that we're actually seeing a large Texas State Trooper presence down at the bridge is, according to law enforcement, is that they're worried that some of the males might start to have some civil unrest when they find out that these flights are deporting them back into Haiti. So that's why we have a large law enforcement presence down on the bridges, to make sure no civil unrest happens between those migrants.
Wow, what a volatile situation. Jorge, I don't know if you've seen the pictures yet of the Border Patrol agents on the horses down by the river. Have you gotten any? I know you've got great sources inside the Border Patrol. So far, the press secretary at the White House called the images, quote, horrific. There's been a huge backlash on Twitter and on cable news shows. Have any of the agents you've talked to provided any perspective there?
Yeah, they feel like they've been treated unfairly by the media. There's actually no footage or photos of those Texas State Troopers actually using their whips on the migrants. There is no evidence of that. What the Texas State Troopers are using on these horses are these reins. So these reins are used to control the horses, and these Border Patrol agents and Texas State Troopers, they're trained to, when these migrants get too close, for them to turn the horse so it doesn't, buck one of the migrants. So we haven't seen any information or actually any hard evidence that they actually been whipped or assaulted or struck by any type of whip of some sort. So as of right now, that news is not true at the moment.
Gotcha. Jorge, I know you just got down there, and your reporting over the past couple of years speaks for itself. So as you collect more information, video over the next week, come show us, all right?
Will do. Thank you, Leland.
Thank you, Jorge. The pictures Jorge just talked about are costing political capital the White House just doesn't have to spend, as they try to ignore and pivot to passing a $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill. The latest Rasmussen Reports poll shows the president 13 points underwater on approve, disapprove. Immigration reform has been an Achilles heel for every president since Reagan, regardless of party. And it's divided the president against hardliners in his own party for every president since Reagan. Take a listen.
Immigration reform began in 1986 with an effort to close the back door on illegal immigration. And now, as we open the front door to increased legal immigration, this bill provides long-needed enforcement authority.
We are a nation of immigrants, but we are also a nation of laws. It is wrong and ultimately self-defeating for a nation of immigrants to permit the kind of abuse of our immigration laws we have seen in recent years, and we must do more to stop it.
The steps I've outlined will improve our ability to catch people entering our country illegally. At the same time, we must ensure that every illegal immigrant we catch crossing our southern border is returned home.
And they need us to enact comprehensive immigration reform once and for all. They need not, we can't wait 20 years from now to do it. We can't wait 10 years from now to do it. We need to do it by the end of my first term as president of the United States of America.
Now it's Joe Biden's problem. Philip Wegman covers the White House for Real Clear Politics. Joining us now. Philip, always good to see you, my friend. No administration ever wants to show weakness. Scale of 1 to 10, though, how big of a crisis does the White House think they're in?
The White House realizes that this is a problem, and it's been a problem since the moment that Joe Biden became president. He had promised that the uptick in migrants coming across the border illegally was just seasonal. That's a promise that he made during his first press conference. But we've seen the surge not let up. It's continued through the summer, and it's even continuing now into the fall. The argument from the administration is that they want some type of immigration reform, but they want to also tag it on to the $3.5 trillion spending bill making its way through Congress right now. That bill, just on the infrastructure side alone, is already facing a tough slog. It's going to be even difficult to find a long-term solution if they add immigration to that bill.
Yeah, we're going to talk to Pablo about the inner workings of adding immigration in a minute. This sort of juxtaposition caught our eye over the weekend. You have Kamala Harris, who is the declared border czar, flipping a coin at a football game. You have President Biden riding his bike on vacation. And then you have the images that you see right now there on the southern border under the bridge. Does the White House kind of think that if they don't fully address what's happening under the bridge, that the American public will not really worry about it or think about it?
Well, what we've seen from numbers that the Border Patrol has released, we saw that in August, that was a 21-year high. More than 200,000 migrants were taken into custody by Border Patrol. That was down just by 2%. According to their latest numbers. So what that tells you is that up until this point, yes, they have been able to get away from this. The administration knows that the president's handling of the border is unpopular, but it hasn't led to sort of wall-to-wall coverage that would continue to, force them to slide further down into the polls. I think that what you just said, though, what you just focused on, the fact that it is a specific bridge, that this is an area that we can identify and we can zoom in on, I think that changes things, because now we're not just talking about, hundreds of thousands of individuals. We're talking about a specific set. The American people can see what's going on. And I think that is ultimately going to create pressure.
So where does the pressure go? Do they have to I should say this. What's the specific pressure on the administration? Because they're caught between the rock and a hard spot of the images that they see and then their progressive wing, which says we should let more people in.
Yeah, and when you teed up the segment by pointing to all of the past presidents who have dealt with very similar crisis to this, but yet there hasn't been a solution, I think that encapsulates the issue here. It's going to be very difficult to do a hasty reform. It's going to be very difficult to do something that is going to change the system through a fly-by-night situation. But yeah, where does the pressure actually, explode out of? I think that we got a good sense of that in the White House briefing room today when you saw reporters pushing the administration clearly, from the left. They weren't asking for more restrictions or more security. They were complaining about the treatment of Haitian migrants. And, when Jim Acosta and others are noting that there is one standard for Afghans and there's another standard for
see where that was
Haitian migrants.
Yeah, you can
you
definitely
can see where that is headed in that argument.
Yeah, and also where it's heading on the argument over the immigration and $3.5 trillion spending, which is where we're going next. Philip, thanks. Great analysis.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Bear with me here for a second, because for the next part of the immigration story, we need to first introduce you to the most powerful person in Washington that you have never heard of. Here she is. Elizabeth McDonough is the Senate parliamentarian. It's a position that's existed since the 1930s. She's the first woman, which sounds like Washington's most arcane and boring job until you learn what she does. She and she alone gets to decide what can be passed through the Senate with 60 votes, as is normally required, or just 51 votes. Over the weekend, the White House got a major setback on their plan to grant effective amnesty to 8 million illegal immigrants. The Biden administration hoped to include the provision in their infrastructure bill, $3.5 trillion bill you've been hearing about, and passed with 51 votes. Here's how Axios reported it. Changing the law to clear the way to legal permanent resident status is tremendous and enduring policy change that dwarfs its budgetary impact. That's the parliamentarian we just introduced you to, writing her findings. Pablo Manriquez covers Capitol Hill for Latino Rebels and joins us now. Pablo, appreciate it. Could we add least popular among progressives to Elizabeth McDonough's job description and title?
Yeah, and most successful at humiliating Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer, because this is the second time that Democrats have had trouble with McDonough, who is a Hill staffer who serves at the pleasure of the Senate Majority Leader. When Republicans had problems with a parliamentarian in the 1990s, they dismissed said parliamentarian, in the early aughts, they dismissed said parliamentarian Bob Dove because the parliamentarian didn't want to include a $5 billion relief fund for disaster management, for hurricane relief, basically. So I've asked senators today, and I've been asking senators for about a month and a half, if it came to the point where the Senate parliamentarian continued to nix immigration reform from the budget reconciliation, would they replace her? Now, senators have said, no, it would require 51 votes. But, when I talk to Republican aides who, have worked under Mitch McConnell when he was Senate Majority Leader, they all agreed that they wouldn't let a little thing like the parliamentarian get in the way of a Republican agenda. So it's kind of curious that Senator Schumer, that Senate Majority Leader Schumer, is allowing her to be such an obstruction.
I'm glad you brought up Schumer's name, Senate Majority Leader. Here he is talking about what the parliamentarian did. Take a listen.
Last night's ruling was extremely disappointing. It saddened me, it frustrated me, it angered me, because so many lives are at stake. But make no mistake, the fight continues.
Missing from that argument was what the parliamentarian got wrong in her ruling, though.
Right. That's the thing. It sounds to me like immigration, or at least legalization, according to Charles Schumer's political calculus, is just a big dog and pony show. Because if they actually had something of substance, they were like, so first of all, you got to remember, this is Charles Schumer's argument that he put to his staffer, his Hill staffer, and the Hill staffer was like, no, sir, sorry, you just can't do this. And he's just like, okay. Well, then we'll try a different way, because now they're putting together a new proposal for the parliamentarian of a smaller legalization package. But I will say this, Leland, in the lower chamber, I just talked to AOC, Ilhan Omar, Jim McGovern, and a couple of other people about whether or not they support whether they will support a reconciliation package without an immigration component. And all of them kind of stopped short at saying that, yes, they are willing to draw a line in the sand. But there are two members of the House, Lou Correa from Orange County and Chuy Garcia from Chicago, who have said they are a hard no on reconciliation without an immigration component.
Well, as you say, line in the sand, battle lines are drawn. I'm wondering about the optics of this. And we've talked for a while, but President Trump said build a wall. Lots of people said that was un-American. We look at the video of 10 or 12,000 people camped under a bridge in squalor. Is that any more American than building a wall?
I mean, it's sort of, I think that the optics the optics during a Democratic administration of a lot of black refugees, migrants being mistreated, say, by Border Patrol officers on horseback or whatever, the optics are bad, Leland. The optics are bad either way. Building a wall was ultimately an unsuccessful push by the Trump administration to enact their immigration policies. I think that this whole don't come here agenda, or this whole don't come here talking point, is also going to be an unsuccessful push by the Biden administration to, discourage people from coming here. At least this is not policy. This is just politics.
At least so far, it hasn't worked, because the numbers are
and it's not
7, 8, 9, 10 times. Well,
and it completely underestimates the resiliency of immigrants. So it seems like they need to either come up with a plan that's rooted in policy that can be enforced on the books, that can reform things, or walk away.
Pablo, honest and brief analysis is why we have you, which is why we're going to end now, but we always appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks,
the crisis at the southern border is going to be front and center in the 2022 Texas governor's race. Mr. Biden is losing support among Latinos. Get that. So does that mean Beto O'Rourke has a chance against Governor Greg Abbott? Plus, the markets took a major plunge today. We're going to talk about how the Chinese play a big part in this. But before we head to break, quick update on the Gabby Petito story. She disappeared in Wyoming back in August. Over the weekend, FBI agents found human remains believed to be hers in Grand Teton National Park. Gabby's boyfriend, Brian Laundrie, disappeared from under police noses over the weekend. He was the last person to see Gabby and returned home to Florida without her or her van. The FBI searched his parents' home today, towed a car, took other evidence, but so far haven't arrested anybody and haven't found the boyfriend. News Nation's Brian Enton is on the ground in Florida doing great work. We'll go to him with any immediate updates. Otherwise, Prime's going to have a full report in the next hour.
The the economy is slowing down. I think looking at those numbers in China last week, I mean, irrespective of what's happening on the Evergrande issue, look at those retail sales, industrial production numbers.
The bottom fell out of the stock market today, so finish watching the show before you check your 401k. Here's a look at today's numbers. NASDAQ fell more than 2%. S&P and Dow fell just below 2%. The Dow was down more than 600 points. It's been a bad couple of weeks. The latest article from the Wall Street Journal highlighted the dismal day. Market participants increasingly believe Beijing will let Evergrande fail and inflict losses on its shareholders and bondholders. So what does all that mean? A man who spent several years on the trading floor of Chicago, now the voice of Denver, Colorado, Ross Kaminsky, the newly minted host of the Ross Kaminsky Show on KOA, 8:50 a.m. in Denver. Ross, congratulations. Good to see you.
Thanks, you too. Congratulations to you too as well. I know it's been a couple of months, but congrats.
It's been fun, and we're glad to have you. Why does it matter that some Chinese companies having a hard time?
You know, a lot of times when markets have a really bad day, people look for a reason. They look to point to something. It was this or was that. Oftentimes, it could be just the market was real high. People were looking to take profits. But when you do see a company as big as Evergrande looking like it's teetering, you do have to wonder, especially with what we saw in the United States a little over a decade ago. But I think it's a much bigger problem for China than for us. They've got a few $100 billion in debt, but less than 20 billion of it is denominated in dollars. So it's not going to directly be a huge problem for America. I think other things are more likely to be a bigger problem here.
It brings up this interesting point about have things been too good for too long?
Yeah, you know, so two things. People shouldn't confuse the market with the economy. They're very different. I had a lot of friends who, for example, when Barack Obama was president, refused to buy into the stock market because they didn't like the politics. Can't think that way. So I don't know that it's too good for too long, but I do know, and this is my own bias, I suppose, that the path that the Democratic Party is on right now is a very, very dangerous path for markets and for the economy after the initial sugar high of spending so much money.
You said the sugar high. How much effect does the dysfunction in Washington have on the markets right now?
I think they're just waking up to it. I think they've been trying to ignore it for a really long time. But now as they're coming up to this debt ceiling thing, and what we're going to hear is one politician, especially on the left after another, talking about the debt limit as if it doesn't get raised, we're going to default on our debt. That is almost certainly not true. They can still pay debt out of income that's coming in. They might, though, have some real political problems where maybe they can't pay, some checks to veterans. Whatever it is that they're not going to do, they will do the ones first, or rather they will not do the ones first that will cause the most political headache for Republicans. But Republicans don't want to help.
Yeah, you can just imagine the headlines now of law enforcement on the southern border not getting paid and those kinds of images and stories which become the political footballs during shutdowns and debt ceilings. Hey, Ross, great conversation as always, and good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Leland.
Yeah, thank you. The United Nations Secretary General is parroting a message from communist China. Will President Biden stand up to the both of them when he addresses the UN tomorrow? And President Biden's party holds both the House and the Senate, but is he the one really calling the shots? Why the party's progressives might be more powerful than the man in the Oval Office. France had our back during the Revolutionary War, making them America's longest ally. But now they say we stabbed them in the back. Comes down to a partnership between the United States and UK to share highly sensitive nuclear submarine technology with Australia. It's causing Australia to cancel a deal with France. France's ambassador to the United States says they were not informed. Now, President Biden reportedly seeking a call with the French president to smooth things over. We understand the French president perhaps isn't ready to make up yet. Pfizer's announced a clinical trial showing its COVID vaccine is safe and effective for 5 to 11-year-olds. But a lot of parents are already saying no. We're going to delve in this tomorrow. Recent poll finds 1/4 of parents say they will definitely not get their 5 to 11-year-olds vaccinated. 26% say they will right away. 40% say they're going to wait and see. That's from the Kaiser Family Foundation. The continuing showdown over vaccines is just one of the growing problems for President Biden. CNN put this together as the list of President Biden's headaches, from the rebuke of the immigration bill, we talked about that, his dispute with France over submarines, the crisis at the Texas bridge, drone strike killing civilians, FDA panel rejecting his vaccine booster plan, a possible infrastructure vote delay, and the looming debt ceiling battle. President Biden just wrapped up his meeting with the UN Secretary General ahead of his speech tomorrow at the UN General Assembly. This, as the UN chief parrots China state media on U.S. tensions, saying, quote, "We need to avoid at all costs a Cold War. We need to reestablish a functional relationship between the two powers," calling it essential to address the problems of vaccination, problems of climate change, and many other global challenges. China state media reporter then tweeting he, meaning the Secretary General, should pressure Biden to stop the Cold War, which threatens the human existence too. Stephen McFarland spent 3 years as ambassador to Guatemala, also led a civilian military reconstruction team in Iraq. Joins us now. Mr. Ambassador, appreciate it. Does the president show up at the UN strong or weak?
He shows up with certainly some strengths and some weaknesses. The weaknesses, of course, everyone knows, have been reported on the show. The big one was Afghanistan. I think his strength, though, is his understanding that the United States not only has to be the strongest military power and a strong economy, it also has to be a strong diplomatic power, and that the United Nations is one of the most important places to carry that out.
You know, when President Biden came to office, we were told that America's allies were going to once again be happy because America was back and the chaos of President Trump was over. You look around the world in terms of what's happened with our allies, especially after Afghanistan and now this French debacle. Hard to imagine that every one of our friends feels really that great right now, right?
I disagree. I think certainly Afghanistan raised questions about exactly what was the United States thinking in the way that it conducted that evacuation, carrying out a deal that had been, of course, signed by the previous administration. I think what they're really looking for is, what is the United States message? How coherent a policy can it put together? And this is an intangible that they're always going to be asking. Does it seem like the Americans know what they're doing? So that'll be the test for President Biden.
Certainly a test. This is from the UN Secretary General about what he seems to be most worried about, which is climate change. Take a listen.
Today, no issue can be solved without the United States. And so without the United States on climate action, we were doomed. But the fact the United States are on climate action is not enough. Because today, the largest emitter is not the United States, it's China.
Chinese seem to know better than anybody how much President Biden wants a deal on climate, and are using that pretty well, aren't they?
I think climate change is something that obviously each country is going to, if there is an agreement, try to get the best deal that they can. And I think the United States has the intelligence assets to figure that out. I don't think I don't see the Biden administration somehow giving away the store, because the only way a climate agreement will work
I only
is
got
that
about 30
all
seconds.
countries are on board.
I only got about 30 seconds. You say make an agreement. My dad always said you can't have a good deal with bad people. Is there any reason to think we should be able to make a deal with China?
Sure, we had deals with bad people all the time in the Cold War. Trust but verify was what President Reagan used to say. You got to put a lot of emphasis on the verification and on trying to figure out if this is in fact something that is in both or in all countries' interests.
Yeah, well, the Chinese seem to be extracting a high price for what's in their interest. Mr. Ambassador, thank you. We appreciate it.
Most welcome.
All right. Progressives also parrot the UN Secretary General and Chinese state media, saying Mr. Biden should care more about cooperation with China on climate change than confronting China on everything from expanding its to confront China on everything from expanding its nuclear arsenal. You're gonna have to say that more often these days. To human rights abuses not seen since Nazi Germany. And it's not just foreign policy. Progressives are also challenging Mr. Biden on his agenda. Politico out with a new report that liberals are getting ready to grab the wheel of the Democratic agenda, with progressives in the House now blocking the Senate-passed infrastructure bill unless they get assurances the Democrats' separate spending bill will also get passed. Pablo talked about this earlier. We bring in Philip Levine, former mayor of Miami Beach, a perhaps, shall we say, more centrist Democrat. Can President Biden get control back of his own party?
Leland, I think he needs to. And I think that what's going on right now with the progressive wing is that, God forbid, they're going to cause this $1 trillion infrastructure bill to be lost. And it's unfortunate. You know, the old expression is, you know, why would you want to throw the baby out with the bathwater? You know, it may not be perfect, but it's certainly something. You know, I live on Miami Beach where we have a lot of water around us. I just finished something with the Aspen Institute that's coming here about climate change. And with $1 trillion, that can help coastal cities. That can help build better roads. That can build bridges. It's a shame that the progressive wing is going to cause this possibly not to happen.
I'm going to play a soundbite from somebody that you don't often agree with, but I think you might. Take a listen to Ted Cruz.
Whether it passes or not will depend on 50 Democrats in the Senate. Do they get Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to go along? I can tell you Chuck Schumer is putting a world of hurt and pressure on the two of them. I hope they stand their ground, that they have demonstrated some real courage so far, standing up to the crazies in their party.
All right, that's Ted Cruz talking about standing up on the $3.5 trillion and saying enough. Do we mark this day as the day you agreed with Ted Cruz?
Well, I could say this. The one thing I will agree is that we have crazies in both parties.
Okay, fair enough.
And I think as a radical centrist, as I call myself, I think what the senator is saying is that, you know, will the center hold? I am hoping that Senator Manchin will not vote for this, because I think this is the wrong thing for the country at this time for a variety of reasons. It's not that we don't want to help and more infrastructure and more programs and make our country green.
We just don't have the money. Yeah, we just don't have the money to do it. I guess this goes back to this point of who's really in control of the Democratic Party, because President Biden, it seems as though, is not going to be able to get anything done without this progressive wing.
Well, I think the movie hasn't played out fully yet.
Okay.
And I think that what's going to end up happening, what I hope ends up happening is that this $1 trillion infrastructure bill somehow is able to pass. Maybe they tie it together and the $1 trillion passes and the 3.5 doesn't, but it gets a fair showing. But I think the country is not going to be happy with overspending to the point where we go into an inflationary environment, as I said before, that we won't be able to recover from. It's not the right thing at this time. Remember, there's still a tremendous amount of money that's been appropriated for COVID that hasn't even been spent yet. Yeah. So why are we spending more money now?
I go back to this issue, though. You're rightly pointing about sort of the policies. I'm thinking sort of more about how the party is interacting with each other. This from the Atlantic headline: why Biden bet it all on mandates. The president's decision could cost Democrats in 2022, 2024. He doesn't care. It's a fascinating piece, but it goes back to this idea that the president is being driven by the far left of the party, not the radical centrists that he said that he was when he got elected.
Listen, I think the president wants to do something that's going to help the entire nation. And I think when he has this aggressive, passionate, left-wing, progressive side pulling, and he, I believe in my heart, knows that the $1 trillion is the right way to go, I think what he's probably trying to do is navigate both sides to be able to say, let it go to a vote. It probably won't pass, but at least the $1 trillion will pass. But the reality is that I said it before.
Let me just do this in 30 seconds. How much do you worry that this fracture in the Democratic Party is going to be one that will make 2022 and 2024 impossible for Democrats?
I worry greatly because the way it's going right now, I think that's unfortunately the way it's going to go. With the crime and chaos in the cities, the unfortunate debacle we experienced in Afghanistan, the progressive pull to the party, which is not where the country's at, they could really put a situation together next year. The Democrats could suffer tremendous losses. I think that's unfortunately the movie that I hope that we don't see, but the movie that I kind of feel we may.
All right. Mayor, always good talking to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. The lack of progress on immigration that we talked about at the top of the show, and also the mayor just talked about, is hurting President Biden among a key group, Latino voters. Now, this is from the University of Texas Tyler poll shows Latino voters in the state are unhappy with the president. Of 300 Latinos polled on President Biden's job performance, only 13% strongly approve of his work so far, 22% approve, 54% disapprove in one way, 11% said they had no strong opinion. It seems the president's support might prove ineffective in the upcoming governor's race in Texas. Democrat Beto O'Rourke is toying with a run for that seat, reported by our friends at Axios. 45% of Texans approve of sitting Governor Greg Abbott's performance, 17% approval ratings among Latinos. That's above the president's 13%. However, it would not be a landslide election since 54% of those polled by the University of Texas Tyler say the state is headed in the wrong direction. Dr. Lauren Wright, associate research scholar at Princeton University, gives classes on the presidency and executive power, including the governor's offices, and joins us now. Good to see you, ma'am. Thank you. What do you make of Beto O'Rourke floating this idea of running for governor at the same time you have these massive problems on the Texas border and the president MIA and Abbott cracking down?
I mean, that's a tough one for Democrats in a Republican-leaning state. Yes, the demographics are changing, but it's still a reliably Republican state. I would pay attention to someone like Matthew McConaughey, even, who in the same poll that I checked out has 35% support, which is more than Beto O'Rourke and sitting senators and the sitting governor, which is really of interest to me, but let's watch it closely.
I think we're not going to be able to get any pictures of Matthew McConaughey quick enough, but I know the booth.
Well, everyone knows what he looks like.
I know the booth there, and you're smiling, talking about it. I guess the question is, Beto O'Rourke coming back in Texas. It was not too long ago. He said, "Yes, I want to take away your AR-15s and your AK-47s." That's when he was trying to run for president. I can't imagine that works very well in Texas.
I would be surprised if Republican opponents didn't constantly bring that up. And you're right. So Beto O'Rourke is a progressive Democrat running in a state where Democrats are not advantaged. And typically those candidates don't do that well. A moderate Democrat, perhaps with less of a publicized record, or at least not a progressive record, might be a better bet.
Yeah, you think about Democratic states where you got moderate Republican governors, Maryland, for example, where it works. This sort of begins to bring up a larger issue about what we're seeing on the Texas border. How is that going to play into the president's polling? And I know something you've studied, which is Kamala Harris's polling, since she's the border czar.
Well, to put that poll in context that we just talked about, Biden and Harris are down among all groups, not just Hispanic voters. And so I think it would be a mistake for Republicans to look at this and say, wow, look, that 8 percentage point gain that Trump made that was historic in 2020 is here to stay. And Democrats would be making a huge strategic error to just assume that as issues change and we get closer to the next election, Hispanics will come back into the fold. No one can really make those assumptions right now. And finally, when this poll was taken earlier in the month, if anything, Afghanistan and Delta and the economy were more salient issues than even immigration. And so it's possible these numbers get worse rather than better.
As we like to say here, two things can be true at once, and you point that out in terms of what Republicans and Democrats need to be worried about. You kind of wonder if this immigration issue goes away. We know the White House is hoping it does, so they don't have to keep dealing with questions like this. Take a listen.
Where's the vice president on any of this? Isn't she supposed to be addressing the root causes of migration?
Absolutely. And she has been addressing the root causes of migration by working with countries in the region to ensure they have the assistance they need to reduce the number of people who are coming and trying to make those journeys across the border. We've actually seen some reductions in some of those numbers. That doesn't change the fact that this is a very challenging situation in Del Rio. We're working to implement our policies, and we're working to ensure we are also addressing root causes.
Noteworthy, she also hasn't been to the border yet. Do people hold the president and the vice president accountable for what's happening, or whether they show up to see it firsthand and deal with it?
Well, that's a great question. Whatever is in the news that is a crisis falls on the president's doorstep. That's the most focal person in the government. And so they are ultimately held responsible for whatever is happening. However, on some issues like national security, presidents tend to get credit for response rather than prevention. So it's possible to make it out of this, but with the immigration issue and the Biden administration, a huge obstacle, and this is what I teach my public policy students, is the arbitrary nature of the policy. There needs to be a better, clear articulation of it. If there are a set of policies, defend them clearly.
Yeah.
But
you kind of want,
zero
we haven't.
tolerance also causes problems.
Yeah, we certainly have seen the White House on defense rather than articulating much when it comes to immigration over the past couple of weeks. Dr. Wright, always great to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, Leland.
All right. During their takeover, the Taliban released thousands of prisoners. Just ahead, how that cost the lives of 13 U.S. service members. The withdrawal of American forces from Afghanistan seems to get more embarrassing by the day. India's First Post is reporting this weekend that the suicide bomber who killed 13 service members outside the Kabul airport last month had been released from prison by the Taliban just days before the attack. First Post, citing Indian intelligence sources, claims that Abdul Rahman had been in CIA custody. He had been arrested by Indian authorities after allegedly plotting ISIS-K attacks in New Delhi. However, Rahman and thousands of other ISIS-K members were allegedly allowed to walk free from a jail at the Bagram Air Force Base by the Taliban when they took over Afghanistan. Days later, he killed 13 soldiers and at least 169 Afghan civilians in that suicide bombing outside of the airport. General Donald Bullock was one of the very first people inside of Afghanistan on the ground following the 9/11 attacks. 2 awards for valor, 5 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, and 10 tours there. General, should we be surprised by the fact that the Taliban let out a bunch of bad guys?
No, we should not be surprised. It's completely irresponsible, lack of judgment by the president in his planning, by the Secretary of Defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Secretary of State.
I guess this would be the question. The administration had this strategy of we can keep the bad guys in check by droning them from afar over the horizon. The fact that the first time we tried to drone people, we droned an aid worker, and we don't really know who may be let out of prison, seems kind of scary.
Well, it's very scary in that I've never heard of over-the-horizon attacks like that. And I've been involved in a lot of those types of missions in my career.
What do you mean when you say you've never heard of over-the-horizon? That's not a thing that exists, or?
No, well, it exists in infiltration, but when you're getting people in over the horizon to infiltrate an area, but I've never heard it used in the context of drone strikes and other strikes. This is something I believe they made up on the fly.
So what does that mean about our ability? Is it fair to say that the Taliban's going to be able to find these bad guys or other terrorist organizations who are let out and train them back up?
No, I don't think they'll be concerned about that. They'll try and operate with some kind of cooperation and coordination, and that's going to be to the detriment of that region, and of course to the detriment of many countries outside that region, to include the United States.
General, we appreciate your service. I wish we had more time to talk. We're right up against a hard break. We're going to have you back, sir. All right?
I would love to come back. Thank you, and God bless you.
Looking forward to it. We'll be right back. We briefly touched on this. Pfizer says they now have evidence of the COVID vaccine working in 5 to 11-year-olds. Tomorrow, some doctors may say not so fast. Prime's next.